Remember when heavy metal ruled our lives? When great albums and great concerts came out every month?
Yeah, the 80s.
Well, it's time to look back at those days, so take out your old vinyl
And cassettes.
put on your denim jacket.
And raise your fists in the air.
It's time for the 80s Metal Hang, a classic heavy metal podcast.
Oh, yeah.
All right, on this week's episode, Def Leppard conquers America with Pyromania, Triumph releases Never Surrender, and Dio-era Black Sabbath breaks up after Live Evil. Also UFO, Judas Priest, Ozzy, and more on this week's episode of the 80s Metal Hang.
Hey, guys, what's going on? We're going to start this thing off with January of 1983. And why is that?
Well, we chose January 1983 because Craig and I met each other in 82-83 school year. We were in middle school. And it's just, we were both into music before then, but it's kind of ground zero of buying albums every week, trying to learn songs off albums, having our little basement bands. So we're starting in January 1983. I mean, some episodes down the road, we might go back to 81 and 82, but...
Yeah, it was a big year, for us at least.
And actually looking back at it, we've realized it's a big year for metal also, that every month there were like monumental, groundbreaking albums coming out. So each episode, we're going to do a month.
Oh, yeah, that should be good. There's way more than enough to talk about. It's so much different than it is today. Magazines, concerts, music videos were brand new and they're really exciting. You sat and you watched MTV for hours hoping that video you loved came on, which it usually didn't because it was metal. It's beside the point.
But one of the first albums we're going to talk about that did, exist on MTV in a very big way was in January 1983, January 20th to be exact. Def Leppard's Pyromania came out.
Oh, yeah, that thing exploded.
It sure did. And I remember hearing the Photograph lick, for the first time. And even to this day, when I hear the song start, I always get like, ooh, it's one of those guitar intros that and I can't say I make it through the whole song anymore because I've heard it 5,000 times. Yeah. But it was definitely one of those bands that for kids as young as we were, it was like, try to learn Photograph on guitar.
Yeah, and we have a friend whose older brother was in bands and stuff, and I don't know how I did it, but I finagled him into teaching me Photograph. Not really the solo because I was like 13, but and that's memorable to me, definitely. And also it came out, and they were coming around on tour with Billy Squier at Nassau Coliseum. And we were all like, oh, we should go. We didn't really care about Billy Squier at the time, but...
I liked Billy Squier.
Yeah, he was good. But, I mean, at that point, it was Def Leppard.
Right. So did you go?
I did not go.
You did not go. All right, you missed an opportunity because Def Leppard was an opening band for a very short period of time. They pretty quickly took over from Billy Squier and went out on their own headlining tour. I mean, this is an album that went on to sell 10 million copies. Did you have a copy?
Of course.
Of course. I actually remember the first time I tried to record off the radio the song. And this is not like when my stereo was all connected. This was me holding a tape recorder up to the speaker to try to record it. And I remember I wrote a list on the cassette of what songs I'd recorded off the radio. And I wrote Autograph by Def Leppard because I thought they were saying autograph, not photograph.
Oh, man.
But we're looking at the album right now, and it's got the famous cover.
Yes, that was a big deal later on with the old PMRC thing.
I can't imagine someone was offended by Def Leppard. What could they possibly have thought was wrong with this album?
Because they were blowing up the building.
Oh, so the flames on the front through a scope of a rifle, I guess. They thought that people were going to go out and start shooting fire at skyscrapers, I guess.
Yeah, Tipper Gore didn't like that one bit.
Yeah, so this album ended up going to number 2 on the Billboard charts. It sold 10 million copies. It sold 6 million copies just in the first year. And it was actually Def Leppard's third album after On Through the Night and High and Dry. It was produced by someone pretty well known, Mutt Lange.
Yes.
You've heard of him?
Of course, yeah.
From Shania Twain?
Yeah, and this was the first one with Phil Collins.
Yes.
Not from Genesis.
The solo that you couldn't figure out, you said earlier, was Phil Collins' solo.
Yeah.
But the guitar intro was actually could have been by their guitar player, Pete Willis, who played on Through the Night and High and Dry, but then they got rid of him in the middle of recording Pyromania, and Phil Collins was brought in. He did all the solos on the album.
Yeah, you told me that once. I never knew that.
Yeah. It's actually on the back of the album. It says rhythm guitars, guitar backing tracks on all songs, Pete Willis. So, this was an album Mutt Lange supposedly records where he just does everything piece by piece. I found out years later from YouTube videos that some of the drums are electronic drum machines. And I probably didn't notice it at the time, but on the back where they talk about backing vocals and who played keyboards, it says CM Fairlight computer programmed by some guy. So the Fairlight, that was an early drum machine that I probably didn't know in 1983. But they basically say right on the back that they programmed some of the drums.
So he wasn't playing the real drums, or?
I think he's playing, but they took bits and pieces and sort of patched it all together, which, they used to be able to do that, by splicing tape back in the day. But as things started getting a little more, if you can imagine 1983 being a time of technology, it was nothing compared to now. But there's videos on YouTube where they break down, like even photograph some of the drum fills that he does before like the second verse. You can kind of tell that there are, computer enhanced.
I guess like just to tighten it up rather than do another take, or?
Yeah, Rick Allen played on the first two albums and he played on High and Dry just fine. But Mutt Lange, I think, liked building songs. So he would just take riffs, take drum parts, take keyboard parts, and kind of put it all together. Because if you look at the track listing of the album, the songs are written by various members, but Mutt Lange actually gets a credit on every song as a songwriter.
Well, whatever he did, it works.
Well,
I have to say, sorry to interrupt you, but
that's what we're here for.
Okay, well, every Def Leppard record or album, whatever you want to say, is just the sound. They know what they're doing. Like you said, Mutt Lange. The mixing and the production is just amazing. Like there's so much stuff going on, but you hear everything. It's just wild.
Well, Mutt Lange had a track record, having done Highway to Hell and Back in Black. He actually did the Def Leppard album High and Dry before this, so I guess they were sold on his credentials. And he did this album. He did Hysteria with them 4 years later. He even did the Cars, Heartbeat City. You might think and Drive. He did that too. I think he may have done Foreigner. And then my Shania Twain joke before was because he produced her albums and then married her.
Whenever I think of the Cars, you know what I think of?
I don't.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Moving in Stereo? That song? That's on a different album, I think. This is a PG podcast.
Okay. Could have been.
No explicit content. I actually had to mark that on Spotify that we had no explicit content. But yes, we all know what you're talking about. Moving in Stereo by the Cars.
Okay.
Speaking of songs, let's talk about some Def Leppard songs. This album has Rock Rock Till You Drop, Photograph, Stage Fright, Too Late for Love, Die Hard the Hunter, Foolin', Rock of Ages, Action Not Words, Coming Under Fire, and Billy's Got a Gun. Have any favorites?
I don't know. I liked Rock of Ages, and I thought Foolin' was cool. For some reason, I thought that solo was really cool. It was badass to me at the time.
Yeah,
Still is, though.
I don't know if Steve Clark, the then guitar player, did any solos. I don't know if it was all Phil Collins, but Phil Collins a good guitar player?
Yeah, definitely. I haven't heard much of his stuff lately, but I've heard he's really shredding and stuff. I couldn't say for sure, though.
I think he actually did a G3 tour, believe it or not, with like a couple of shows with Steve Vai and Satriani, or at least Satriani and someone else. So for him to get on the stage with guys of that caliber,
you have to know your
you have to know your stuff, or have chops.
Yeah, definitely.
This album, it was just huge. It was everywhere. It only made it to number 2 because Michael Jackson was number 1 of all of 1983 practically. So they were always number 2 behind Michael Jackson's Thriller. The album had so many singles and videos that they re-released their album before High and Dry and put out a new version of Bringing on the Heartbreak, just because everything Def Leppard was selling all through 83. And even though they started opening for Billy Squier, they ended up playing stadiums at the end of the tour.
And how many Union Jack shirts do you think they were responsible for selling?
The British flag was never more popular in this country.
Hey.
Since 1776, no one was wearing a Union Jack in this country. But then 1983, that all changed.
I never had one, though.
All right, so you cannot talk about January 1983 without talking about Def Leppard. Let's move on to another album that came out the same month. This album was by a trio from Canada.
And it's not who you think it is.
It's probably not your first guess, but it is a band from the Toronto area. 3 guys, bass player, guitar player, and drummer, except in this band, you had 2 different singers, neither of whom was Geddy Lee.
Yep, and Neil Peart was not in it either.
No. So this band had Rick Emmett instead of Alex Lifeson. It had Mike Levine instead of Geddy Lee, and it had what's his name again? Gilmore? Gilmore. Yeah, how did I not know that, right? Gilmore? I just realized his name sounds like Gilmore, like David Gilmore. That's his name, right? The drummer?
You've thrown a blank, huh?
Why am I drawing a blank? I'm getting so old. Yeah, Gilmore. How did I not know that? So yes, the band we're talking about is Triumph. It's Triumph, a trio from Canada, came out with their album Never Surrender. Some of our research tells us it came out in December of 82, but I think that was just in Canada. It supposedly came out in America in January of 83. So if you can believe it, before streaming, albums came out on different days around the world. Sometimes you can go a month where an album will come out in Europe, come out in Japan, and then come out in the United States, all on different dates. So this was Triumph's 6th album. That surprised me.
Wow. You know, I think we talked about this once before. I liked some Triumph songs, but I never loved them. I never really got into them as much as some people. Now, that's not taking anything away from them because, I mean, they had some great stuff. But it was weird. Like, if I put Rush on, for example, I could listen to the record front to back over and over and over and over. Triumph, I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah, fight the good fight. That's cool. Or whatever. So I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I liked them a lot. I can't remember which album I got first, but I had Allied Forces, the album before this, and this album. I want to say I got this one first and then went back and got Allied Forces, but Allied Forces was actually more successful. You mentioned Fight the Good Fight. It had Magic Power on it. It had Say Goodbye on it. So those are
Magic Power was a great song.
got the magic power of the music. Those songs are still played on classic rock radio, if there is such a thing. But Never Surrender, I don't think it was as successful. Had some good songs. Too Much Thinking, World of Fantasy, the title track, and All the Way. There's also a song on here, When the Lights Go Down, they used to open with. Craig and I have a World of Fantasy personal attachment.
Oh, God. Yeah. Our little band, we played songs like Breaking the Law and I think Looks to Kill, Can't Stop Rock and Roll.
Dirty Deeds.
Dirty Deeds, pretty simple song. Basic. I don't want to say simple, but basic.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So one day we decided, let's learn
World of Fantasy. So in the midst of all that heavy rock, we decided to, in my basement, learn World of Fantasy. So if you listen to World of Fantasy, you hear keyboards, multiple layers of guitar, high vocals that we could recreate. Even though we were 13 and probably our voices hadn't dropped yet, we still couldn't recreate the Rick Emmett high register.
It didn't go well.
It did not go well. There's no tape that exists of our basement performance of that, but that's a good thing because I guarantee it was terrible.
Yeah, but we gave it a shot.
You ever see Triumph live?
No, no, I saw them live if you count watching the US Festival on TV. But
the US Festival. We'll get to that in the future.
Well, that's going to be a big one.
Well, I got some good news for you if you've never seen Triumph before. They actually reunited this year for the first time, I think, with these 3 members since 88. They did do a festival or two in 2008, but they're actually reuniting on a Rock and Roll Machine reunion tour.
Don't they have like 9 guys in the band now?
I think it's only 6.
Okay.
But yeah, they seem to have a second person for each band member. They have Phil X, who plays with Bon Jovi now, but actually replaced Rick Emmett in Triumph in the late 80s. He's going to be doing second guitar and some vocals. And then they have Todd Kearns and Brent Fitz, who played with a lot of different people. They played with Slash's solo band, and they even have done some performances as like a Kiss non-makeup tribute band, believe it or not, on like Kiss cruises, but actually really talented guys, Todd Kearns and Brent Fitz. So they have like a second bass player, a second drummer, a second guitar player, and all these guys can add to the backup vocals. So look at an amphitheater or casino near you. Triumph is back on tour. And Craig mentioned before that, I think he did, that we actually are from Long Island, New York. So our local amphitheater is Jones Beach Amphitheater in Wantagh, New York, and they're actually playing there on June 5th.
Wow. I did not mention Long Island, but I'm glad you did.
Yes.
If you hear some New York accents, we apologize in advance.
If we don't pronounce our R's at the end of words,
forget about it.
Forget about it. I think you said Nassau Coliseum before.
Yes.
That's why. People have to know.
Okay.
They
And
have to
it's
know what Nassau Coliseum is.
what's it called now? They moved too, right?
Some New York bank or something. I don't
Who
know.
cares?
New York Bank Coliseum. But if you look at the back of some of your tour shirts, if you're not from the Long Island or New York area, you probably see the words Uniondale or Wantor on the back, and those are our places for shows: Jones Beach and Nassau Coliseum.
Oh yeah, so many memories.
Not to mention Madison Square Garden.
The Coliseum. Oh my God, I don't even know how many times we were there. It's
We'll have to look it up for a future episode.
yeah, so many shows there. It was just great.
I was just there in October. I saw Dream Theater there.
I still remember, like, obviously we couldn't drive there, but I still remember driving. It was on Southern State, and it had the middle lane had all those trees and stuff, and it was like so weird to me because the Long Island Expressway is not like that.
Yes, a thing for us to do when we were younger is just to try to find it. When we had friends or cousins that just started driving, we'd say, we'll find it. And we would get lost every time we tried to go to a concert.
And then we got there, we
Part
bought
of the memories.
bought the T-shirts outside, $10 T-shirt for you.
Nothing like parking lot merch.
Yeah, it was all crooked and off center.
Sold by a guy pulling shirts out of a hefty bag.
Or under his jacket.
Under his own jacket. So Nassau Coliseum is something that'll probably come up a lot because that's where we saw a lot of our concerts as a kid, plus Madison Square Garden. But there was actually a live video in the early 80s recorded at Nassau Coliseum. It was Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult. They did a black and blue tour, and they recorded a concert film at Nassau Coliseum. But a couple of years later, Black Sabbath actually came out with a live album for the first time, official live album for the first time. But this wasn't the Ozzy Sabbath that I'm talking about. It's actually the Dio Sabbath. And the album that they came out with was Live Evil.
That was at the Coliseum?
And that wasn't, no. I was trying to do a transition between stories. Trying to link the story between Nassau Coliseum and speaking of, but no, it was not. It was recorded in Seattle and a couple of cities in Texas, but it's the only live album of that era with Dio. It's Ronnie James Dio, it's Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and on drums is Vinny Appice, and Live Evil. Did you like Dio-era Black Sabbath?
It was okay. I was never a huge Sabbath fan. I know everyone's going to hate me for it.
You're doing a metal show and you're not a huge Sabbath fan?
I'm not a huge Sabbath. I liked Ozzy Sabbath, but I never really loved. I liked some stuff, but I never loved them. I listened to Ozzy. I loved Ozzy. Maybe something deep inside me chose sides. I don't know, but
just love everyone. We've talked about this before, but for both of us, again, we're talking about our beginnings in 82, 83. I think we both agreed that most of the Sabbath stuff we knew came from Ozzy's Speak of the Devil album.
Yeah, that might be it too. I never knew those songs. I was like, oh, Paranoid, that's cool. And then what were we, 12, I think, when Speak of the Devil came out, or 13?
Speak of the Devil came out, in late 82, and this is now January of 83 with Live Evil, because they were competing, basically. A lot of bad blood between the two camps, Ozzy solo and Sabbath. And Ozzy beat him to the punch by coming out with Speak of the Devil.
And that's a great album.
It's all Sabbath. And like you said, I knew Paranoid and Iron Man, and then like in early 83, maybe Christmas, I get these albums, and I didn't know what Symptoms of the Universe was. I didn't know.
It's great stuff.
Yeah. What other songs are on there? Snowblind, I didn't know that song. Sweet Leaf, I didn't know that song.
And it was Rudy Sarzo, of course, and Brad Gillis.
Craig has an obsession with Rudy Sarzo. He'll probably come up every episode.
He was in like every band. I mean, if you say who's the bass player, chances are pretty good that you're going to say, oh, it's Rudy Sarzo.
It's Rudy Sarzo.
He was in that band.
He was in that band. So Speak of the Devil, the famous Ozzy live album, didn't come out in January 83, but came out late 82. Rudy Sarzo, Tommy Aldridge, Brad Gillis, and Ozzy doing all Sabbath. So now, a couple months later, Sabbath comes out with Live Evil, and supposedly broke up the band, the Dio-era band.
And by the way, just a side note, it's really hard to find Speak of the Devil on a streaming platform.
It's not on streaming. You have to kind of go on YouTube to find it. And I found out a little strange tidbit about that album also. Do you know what it's called outside of America?
I don't know.
It's called Talk of the Devil. Evidently, the expression Speak of the Devil that we say, in England, they say Talk of the Devil.
Right. You've got it now.
Talk of the Devil. So, yeah, Useless
So
trivia, which he'll mention Rudy Sarzo every episode, and I'll give you useless trivia every episode. But this is Dio-era Sabbath. They came out with the Heaven and Hell album. They came out with the Mob Rules album. But still, half the set list, more than half the set list, according to this, at least based on this album, is Ozzy songs.
they were great.
And as much as I love Dio, if you get a chance, listen to this album and just hearing Dio sing the beginning of War Pigs,
Yeah.
generals gathered in their masses, it's just, it doesn't sound the same, and Dio's probably the better singer,
Yeah,
absolutely the better singer.
but sometimes that's not the same.
It's not the technical.
You lose the soul.
Yeah, I mean, I love Dio-era Sabbath. I love these two albums, Heaven and Hell and the Mob Rules. I love the Dehumanizer album in the 90s. I even love the Heaven and Hell albums that came out with, which names escapes me.
Gillan?
No, not Gillan. When Dio got back together and did Heaven and Hell with these guys, it was The Devil You Know, the 2009 reunion album that they did. And the 92 album, Dehumanizer, that I mentioned was really good also. But like everything else, Ozzy, everything Ozzy did was successful. So the Speak of the Devil album is something we still talk about today. It sold more, it charted higher, and I don't think anybody really...
I still love that album.
Yeah, I don't think anyone talks about Black Sabbath's Live Evil as being the classic that Speak of the Devil is.
Brad Gillis on guitar on that album is just insane. I mean, wow. That was the first time I've heard someone use a whammy bar like that. I was like, what is going on?
He likes that whammy bar.
Definitely loves it.
By January of 83, though, he had taken his whammy bar and he left Ozzy.
And went to Night Ranger?
He went back to Night Ranger, who I think was already in. Their first album hadn't come out yet, but he was in Night Ranger. I remember reading articles and they were saying, Brad Gillis of, California Rockers, Night Ranger. So I kind of knew the name Night Ranger before Night Ranger even came out with an album, I think. I'm not sure, but Ozzy was, in January of 83, Ozzy was actually still on the Speak of the Devil tour. And I didn't know this, but I always thought, maybe it was an urban legend, that Jakey Lee's first show was the US Festival in like May of 83. But it wasn't. Brad Gillis left in December of 82. And that's when they got Jake. And Jake actually finished the Speak of the Devil tour, which was like, went on for like January, February, March of 83. So he did a bunch of shows, that were quote unquote the Speak of the Devil tour. I never knew that.
Oh. And from what I understand, Ozzy did not like that album at all. That's why you can't find it on any streaming platform. Supposedly he hates it.
Well,
hated it.
I can think of another reason why they don't push it too much, because I'm sure that the other Sabbath guys get money from it.
Sharon,
so why is he going to promote? Why is he going to promote an album that he's splitting the money 4 ways? But that's just a conspiracy theory on my part.
I'm sure Sharon had a lot to say about that.
Probably. And the answer is not Rudy Sarzo. But do you know who was playing bass when Jakey Lee first joined Ozzy's band?
I don't know.
It was a guy named Pete Way.
Oh, Pete. I was going to say Pete Way, but I thought that would be ridiculous to say.
Pete Way was in a band, UFO, if you're not familiar with UFO.
Or Wasted.
That comes later. But yeah, UFO had like 10, 11 albums, and they're not even like a new wave of British heavy metal band. Their first album came out like 73 or 74. But by January 83, UFO came out with an album called Making Contact. And it was the first album they ever did without Pete Way, because Pete Way had left to join Ozzy's band. Pete Way was evidently, and I didn't know UFO much back then, but from what I've read since then, he was kind of a wild guy, a bit of a drinker, gave Ozzy a run for his money, and only lasted in Ozzy's band for like a month.
But didn't Wasted open up for them on the Bark at the Moon tour eventually?
Yeah, I guess they stayed friends, but Pete Way left. He left to form a band with Fast Eddie Clark called
Fastway.
Fastway, who we'll get to in a couple of months.
That's one of the songs we played as younglings.
Say what you will.
I still remember it. Those songs are ingrained in my memory.
Yeah, definitely.
I can't remember yesterday what I ate, but I can play that song and bring it along.
The lick to Say What You Will.
Oh, yeah.
So Pete Way left Ozzy's band. He was in briefly with Jakey Lee. Went on to form a band Fastway, but UFO was kind of left without original members. And UFO, very influential. I knew maybe a couple of songs, 30 years ago. The main song that I knew was Doctor Doctor, because the Iron Maiden intro live, they'd always play Doctor Doctor. But the UFO was pretty much on their way down. I think they broke up within a couple of years of this album. and then they've had so many reunions and breakups, and
Shanker Boy and
Schenker, who was in the band early on, they ended up with a guitar player, Vinnie Moore, for the end of their career.
Vinnie Moore, he's
Vinnie
good.
Moore, yeah. And but they made 22 albums eventually, and now in the last 10 years, they've ceased operation. Their singer, Phil Mogg, says he is retired.
See, I don't know anything about UFO. I never did. And all I knew was that he had the same name as Rudolph Schenker from the Scorpions. And I'm
Right.
like, oh, it must be his brother. But I never
Right.
knew who he was. It's just
Yeah.
like some mysterious guy with a flying V guitar.
Well, he was in the Scorpions too, and in UFO, and then obviously went on to his own stuff, MSG, Michael Schenker Group, which was also the Macaulay Schenker Group. And
He's still touring too.
yeah, I think he played in this area fairly recently.
Yeah, and he wears a big winter hat.
And yeah, and he and Rudolph Schenker evidently don't get along at all.
Really?
You know, they're always bad mouthing each other, or supposedly.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, but by the Making Contact album, this album that came out in January of '83, he was gone. Schenker was gone, and Pete Way was gone, and somehow it all circles back to Ozzy when Pete Way became part of Ozzy's Speak of the Devil touring band, and you know, that was the album that was competing with the Live Evil album from Dio's Black Sabbath, and they broke up. The Dio lineup broke up in the mixing of the Live Evil album because they have, who knows, believe what magazine and what interview, but
Yeah, you'll never know the truth.
you never know the truth. But you had two Americans in the band, and Dio and Vinny Appice, and then you had Geezer and Tony Iommi, and they said there was some of those battles over who should be louder in the mix, but I'm actually happy they broke up because it just gave us another band. You know, Black Sabbath continued, Ozzy continued, and now we had a new band called Dio.
Oh boy, yeah, Dio was just, I loved Dio back then.
So in 3 or 4 months after the Live Evil album, you're going to have Dio's first album come out when he and Vinny find Jimmy Bain and Vivian Campbell.
What's your favorite out of the first three Dio? What would you say is your favorite? Rainbow, Last in Line, or Sacred Heart?
Well, I'd have to go with Holy Diver, the first one.
Oh, Holy
That you
Diver. I'm
just
going to say
called-
Rainbow in the
You
Dark.
just called Rainbow. We can edit that out.
Yeah.
I'd probably go with that first one, even though I do love. There's probably 4 songs on the Last in Line that I would put in my, top 10 Dio songs ever. But Holy Diver, which they could have been working on in January of '83, Holy Diver just has. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
even listen to the song Holy Diver anymore. But Stand Up and Shout, Caught in the Middle, Don't Talk to Strangers, even like the lesser known songs, Invisible and Gypsy.
I always think of Rainbow in the Dark. That was,
Rainbow in the Dark.
we played that too.
We did.
Didn't we try to do the keyboard part with one, like either me or the other guitar player? was
Bands
doing
still do that, yeah. You get 2 guitar players and you just have one play the keyboard lines. God forbid anyone should get a keyboard.
Yeah, and playing that solo is like, it was cool. It was nice and challenging. Like if you could play the Vivian Campbell solo, it was like, oh yeah, I'm doing it, baby.
He was smoking guitar player too, as were so many guitar players in the 80s. So we'll probably have to do a guitar player episode at some point.
Oh yeah, definitely. So many.
Yeah, so we mentioned that Ozzy was on tour, still doing Speak of the Devil. It's hard to do something on the years like January 1983 or, years just don't stop and start. Everyone's life doesn't stop and start on the, January 1st. So there's a lot of carryover from 1982. Not just Ozzy, who was on tour, but also Judas Priest was on tour in January of '83, still touring for their 1982 album, Screaming for Vengeance.
Oh, that was a good one.
You got another thing coming.
We played that too.
You're going to judge everything by whether we played it or not?
Of course.
If we played it in 1983, it was very easy. It was the bass was riding the E or the A, and I don't know what was you learned like Crazy Train at an early age. That was always impressive to me that you were in 8th grade playing the Crazy Train solo.
Oh yeah, well I was motivated. I mean, I still do love Randy Rhoads. Always be my favorite. So, and it was such a great riff, that Crazy Train. It was melodic. It was just great. And the solo, believe it or not, it wasn't that hard in a way. It's like a lot of the things sound really hard because it's finger tapping, but it was just, you know what it is? It's a lot of fun to play Randy Rhoads stuff. There's always something going on. There's always a little lick here and there. It's just, to me, I loved it. So that's why Maybe that's
And
why
I
I played it.
mean, yeah, I mean, his impact obviously is still felt today with, Ozzy passing away and
Mhm.
the tribute concert to Ozzy. It's, not, it's impossible not to be thinking about Randy Rhoads. And even though we're starting this show based on January 1983 and he died in March of 82, we're probably going to mention Randy Rhoads
Yeah.
in 50% of the episodes because it's kind of impossible to not talk about such an influential guitar player.
And one thing I always say about Randy is, like, you listen to him on these guitars and on the playing guitar on these records, and he sounds like this monster. It's like he's so just in your face and he runs out on stage and he's this little tiny guy. It's like,
Polka dot guitar, polka dot bow
yeah,
tie
like,
and
what?
vest.
It reminds me of that scene in Pee-wee's Big Adventure when you see the huge shadow and it comes around a corner and it's just Pee-wee.
Yes.
That's kinda like what Randy was like. He had that big, huge, monstrous shadow, and you're like, "That's who's playing that? Really?"
It's funny, like, because you never saw him live, and I never saw him live either. And, I can't say this, especially at this point in my life, that I want to be 5 years older. But I remember when I was like 20 years old that I'd wished I was 5 years older because here we are talking about going to concerts for the first time in late 82, 83. I do wish that we were 15, 16 in 1980,
That would've been something.
because when I would meet older guys and, jamming in bands, and they would tell me that they saw Ozzy with Def Leppard opening, with Randy Rhoads, or they saw, Van Halen on the Fair Warning tour. I
Oh
would
my
be
god.
I would be so jealous. I'd be like, oh man, I
Imagine
wish
that.
I was like 5 years older.
The Fair Warning
I
tour.
know
That must have been
well, yeah,
insane.
that's like the holy grail to me. Finding videos and footage and pictures of.
The gong and all the amps and oh my god.
I wanted to send a gong. I've wanted to set a gong on fire since I was 11.
You did have a gong once.
I
You didn't
did.
send it on fire, though.
I did not set it on
Set it
fire
on
because I think the gig we were doing was in a school, and I think that would have been frowned upon.
We borrowed it from the music teachers,
But I did
so
borrow a gong for a show once. That'll be for a later episode. But yeah. So January 1983. It seems pretty exciting with all these Ozzy mentions and Priest and Dio, Sabbath, Def Leppard, UFO. So that's really what we're going to be doing. We're going to be taking a month at a time. Obviously, February will be next, and we'll have some special episodes also.
yeah,
Some months are just so packed that we
the
have to.
Us Festival is gonna be a big one.
Yeah, like when we get to May, there's so many albums plus the US Festival. There's, I think, September of '83. Like, it's mind blowing that some of these albums all came out within weeks of each other. For example, in May, we talked about Holy Diver and Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden come out in the same week. So that's going to take a lot of discussion.
It's just crazy. And as we said in the intro, it's like the concerts. I'd be sitting at home, I'd look in the part 2 of Newsday, and all of a sudden I see this big ad like Ronnie James Dio and Nassau Coliseum.
Right.
And it was like, oh my God. And it wasn't like today where we knew about it because there was no internet. So all of a sudden we start seeing these things. And I'm like, oh my God, he's coming. And we were young too. So we.
Footnote number 3, Newsday is our local newspaper on
Yes.
Long Island in New York. But yes, they would have ads. And I actually went to a concert pre-1983. My first concert was Rush in December of 1982, December 9th, the second night of 2 nights at the Coliseum, Nassau Coliseum, on their Signals tour. So I'm coming into January 83, already having gone to a rock show.
And that must have been a great show.
It was.
I think the first time I saw them was with you. Was Grace Under Pressure or?
Yeah, that was Madison Square
great.
Garden in '84. So yeah, so it's January '83, and I'm talking about all this music, but I was already a concert veteran. I'd already seen people throw stuff at the opening band. I'd already bought a shirt in the parking lot. I bought a pretzel from a guy in a shopping cart in the parking lot.
And I was so naive and innocent. You were my Yoda.
Yeah, sure, Yoda.
Yeah.
That was pretty much what was happening in January 1983 in the world of hard rock and heavy metal. And it'll build from here as we move on to February and the rest of the year with some episodes, not just about the albums, but about the tours.
And just various stories of personal experiences and whatever trivia that I may know that Bob doesn't know, or vice versa. Talk about some of the legendary musicians.
Yeah, musicians, happenings, bands forming, bands breaking up, just anything and everything that was happening on a certain month.
Yeah.
In heavy metal history.
I'm just excited about the musicians and stuff because that was the decade where it was crazy. Every guitar player was trying to outdo the other one, and they had the flashy Charvel guitars and the Marshall stacks, and Like, you got George Lynch, you got not Randy, but, like, Jakey Lee and Yngwie eventually, and it was crazy.
Eddie carries on.
Eddie.
There's just a lot of guys,
I'm going blank,
Warren
Marky
DiMartini.
Martini. I mean, oh, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ones. So we'll cover, we'll do episodes on guitar players, we'll do episodes on drummers, singers, anything that we think is part of a good 80s metal hang, we will do.
And yeah, this is our first one, so we're finding our way, as they say in Rush.
And I'm excited that we only have a minute left. And as I'm listening to my own voice in the headphones, I'm realizing that next time we should put 2 bottles of water out, because I'm thinking I'm hearing some lip smacking going on.
Yeah, if we did this podcast back in the 80s, it would be 2 bottles of Jack. But it's not, so it's water now.
Actually, it's probably more likely to be Jack now than back then.
Right.
Back then, I didn't have shelves of whiskey bottles behind me like I do now.
We just had the garden hose on the side of the house.
Yes. So Craig and I are going to go take drinks out of the garden hose on the side of the house.
That's another story.
So that our lips stop smacking. And thank you for listening to episode number 1
of Rock On,
the 80s Metal Hang. We'll see you next week.
Oh, yeah.